And a good afternoon. Welcome back to Mystery Mondays. We're doing Lockwood and Co. Book is the Screaming Staircase, and it's by Jonathan Stroud, another one of my favourite authors. He wrote the Bartimaeus trilogy, which is where I started with him. Very readable trilogy, and I recommend it for anyone looking to get started with him. But I also recommend the Lockwood and Co books. They're very readable, very interesting, and if you have them, read along with me, and we'll go through them together. We're on chapter 3. I froze. For a tightly packed string of heartbeats, I couldn't stir a muscle. In part, of course, this was down to a simple shock, but it was a lot more to it than that. A cold weight pressed like a headstone on my chest. My limbs felt entombed in mud. An icy torpor crept through the roots of my brain. My mind was numbed. The workings of my body dulled. I felt that I couldn't have the strength to move again. A mood stole over me that might have been despair. And had I the energy to truly care about one way or another? But nothing mattered, least of all me. Silence and stillness, an utter paralysis of movement, were all I aspired to, all that I deserved. In other words, I was experiencing ghost lock, which is the effect a type 2 has whenever they choose to direct their power on you. An ordinary person might have stood there, helpless, and let the visitor work its will upon you. But I'm an agent. I dealt with this before. So I rested savage, painful breaths from frigid air, shook the mist clear from my brain. I forced myself to live, and my hands moved slowly towards the weapons on my belt. The girl stood halfway across the floor of the study bedroom, directly ahead of me. I could see her framed by the open door. She was fairly faint, but I saw she stood barefoot on the rolled up rug, or, more precisely, in it, for her ankles were sunk into the fabric, as if she were padding in the sea. She wore a pretty summer print dress, knee-length, decorated with large, rather garish orange sunflowers. It was not a modern design. The dress and the limbs and the long fair hair all shone with dim, pale other light, as if lit by something far away. As for her face was a solid wedge of darkness. No light reached it at all. It was hard to tell, but I guessed she was 18 or so, older than me, but not by too many years. I stood there for a time wondering about this, with my eyes locked on the faceless girl, my hands inching towards my belt. Then I remembered I was not alone in the house. "Lockwood!" I called. "Oh, Lockwood!" I said it as lightly as I could. Showing signs of fear is best avoided where visitors are concerned. Fear, anger, and other strong emotions. They feed on it too easily. It makes them faster, more aggressive. No answer came. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Oh, Lockwood!" I was using a merry sing-song imitation here, as if speaking to a little babe or cuddly pet or something. I might as well have been, in fact, because he didn't bloody respond. I turned my head and called a little louder. "Oh, Lockwood, please come here." His voice sounded muffled back along the landing. "Hold on, Luce, I've got something." "Jolly good, so have I." When I looked back, the girl was closer, almost out on the landing. The face was still in shadow, but drifts of other light that spun around her body shone brighter than before. Her bony wrists were tight against her side, fingers bent like fishhooks. Her bare legs were very thin. "What do you want?" I said. I listened. Words brushed, soft as spider's touch, against my ear. "I'm cold." Fragments. You seldom get more than fragments. The little voice that was a whisper, uttered at great distance, but also uncomfortably near at hand. It seems an awful lot nearer to me than Lockwood's reply had done. "Oh, Lockwood," I cooed again, "it's urgent." Can you credit it? I detected a hint of annoyance in his answer. "Just wait a sec, Luce. There's something interesting here. I picked up a death glow, a really, really faint one. Something nasty happened in the front bedroom too. It's so hazy I almost missed it. Must have been a long while back. But I think it was traumatic, which means It's only a theory, and I'm just playing with ideas here. There might possibly have been two violent deaths in this house. What do you say to that? I chuckled hollowly. I say it's a theory I can maybe help you with, I sang, if only you'd come out here. The thing is, he went on, I don't know how the first deaths got anything to do with hopes. They were only here 2 years, weren't they? So perhaps these disturbances weren't experienced that we're experiencing aren't actually caused by the husband, I cried. Yes, well done, they're not. A brief pause. Finally he was paying attention. What? I said it's not the husband, Lockwood. Now get out here. You might notice I'd slightly abandoned my attempts at keeping it light-hearted. That was because the thing in the study had already picked up on my agitation. It was now drifting through the door. The toenails of the thin, pale feet were long and curled. Both my hands were at my belt. One gripped the rapier hilt, the other closed in the canister of Greek fire. You shouldn't really use magnesium flares in a domestic environment, of course, but I wasn't taking any chances. My fingertips were icy, but sweaty too. They slipped against the metal. A movement from my left. From the corner of my eye, I saw Lockwood emerge onto the landing. He too stopped dead. Ah, he said. I nodded grimly. Yes, next time I call you, while in an operative situation, do me a favour and get your butt out here double quick. Sorry, but I see you got it well in hand. Has she spoken? Yes. What did she say? She says she's cold. Tell her we can sort that for her. No, don't fiddle-faddle with your weapon. That'll only make it worse. The girl had drifted closer across the landing. In response, I'd begun to draw my blade. Tell her we can sort it, Lockwood said again. Tell her we can find whatever she's lost. I did so in as steady voice as I could manage. It didn't have much effect. The shape neither shrank nor changed, and nor became vaporous, nor departed, nor did anything other than the Fitz manual claims that it will do when you give them a hope of release. I'm cold, the little voice said, and then again, much louder, cold and lost. What was that? Lockwood had sensed the contact, but couldn't hear the sound. Some words, but I've got to tell you, Lockwood, this time it wasn't much like a girl talking. It sounded really deep and hollow, and echoed like a tomb. That's never good, is it? No, I think we should take it as a sign. I drew my rapier. Lockwood did likewise. We stood facing the shape in the silence. Never attack first. Always wait. Draw out its intentions. Watch what it does, where it goes. Learn its patterns of behaviour. It was so close now I couldn't make out the text, or I could make out the texture of the long, fair hairs sweeping down the neck, see the individual moles and blemishes on the skin. It always surprised me the visual echo could be this strong. George called it the will to exist, the refusal to lose what it had once been. Of course, not all of them appear this way. It's all down to their personality in life and what precisely happened when that life came to an end. We waited. Can you see her face? I asked Lockwood. Your sight is better than mine. No, it's veiled, but the rest is really bright. I think it's... He stopped. I lifted my hands. This time the voice I heard was the barest tremor in the air. I'm cold, it whispered. Cold and lost. Lost and cold. And dead. The wisps of light that hung about the dead girl flared bright and desolate. For an instant the dark veil was lifted from her face. I screamed. The light went out. A shadow crept towards me, bony arms outstretched. Icy air drove into me, forcing me towards the stairs. I stumbled on the lip and toppled back over the edge, dropping my rapier. I threw out a desperate arm, grasped the corner of the wall. I hung above the void, buffeted by the raging wind, fingertips sailing or slipping on smooth, cold wallpaper. The shape drew close. I was about to fall. Then Lockwood sprang between us, his blade cutting a complex pattern in the air. The shadow reared up, arm raised across its face. Lockwood cut another pattern, hemming it in, on several sides with walls of flashing iron. The shape shrank back, and it darted away from the study, with Lockwood in pursuit, or into the study. The landing was empty. The wind had died. I scrabbled at the wall, pulled myself upright at the top of the stairs, and sank to my knees. My hair was over my eyes. One foot dangled over the topmost step. Slowly, grimly, I reached out for my rapier. There was a dull ache in my shoulder where I'd jarred my arm. Lockwood was back. He bent close to me, his calm eyes scanning the darkness of the landing. Did she touch you? No. Where did you go? I'll show you. He helped me up. You're sure you're all right, Lizzie? Of course. I brushed my hair away, forcing the rapier viciously back into its belt loop. The, sh- the shoulder twinged a bit, but it was okay. So I said, starting towards the study, let's get on with it. In a sec, he held out his hand, stalling my movement. You need to relax. I'm fine. You're angry. There's no need to be. The assault would have caught anyone out. I was surprised too. Did you drop your rapier? I pushed his hand away. Listen, we're wasting time. When she comes back. She wasn't directing it at me. It was all at you, trying to pitch you over the stairs. I guess we know how Mr. Hope came to take his tumble now. My point is, you just need to be calm. She'll feed off your anger super fast and grow strong. Yeah, I know. I didn't say it gracefully. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and then another, concentrating on doing what the manual recommends, mastering myself, loosening the hold of my emotions. After a few moments, I regained control. I withdrew from my anger, let it drop to the floor like discarded skin. I listened again. The house was very silent, but it was silence of the snowfall, heavy and oppressive. I could feel it watching me. When I opened my eyes, Lockwood was standing with his hands in his great coat pockets, waiting, waiting quietly in the blackness of the landing. His rapier was back in its belt. Well, he said, I'm feeling better. Anger gone? Not a trace left. Okay, if you don't feel steady, we're heading home right now. We're not heading home, I said coolly, and I'll tell you why. Mrs. Hope's daughter won't let us in here again. She thinks we're too young. We haven't cracked the case by tomorrow. She'll take us off it and put Fitz and Rotwell on it. We need the money, Lockwood. We'll finish this now. He didn't move. Most nights, he said, I'd agree with you, but the parameters have changed. It's not some poor old boy bothering his widow. It's most certainly the ghost of a murder victim, and you know what they're like. So your head's not in the right place, Luce. Calm and steady as I was, I found his condescension slightly irritating. Yeah, I said, but it's not really me that's the issue, is it? Lockwood frowned. Meaning what? Meaning the iron chains? He rolled his eyes. Oh, come on, that's hardly the... Those iron chains are standard kit for every agent, Lockwood. They're essential for protection when we're up against a strong Type 2. You forgot to put them in, only because George insisted upon oiling them. Your suggestion, if I remember. Oh, so it's my fault now, is it? I cried. Most agents would sooner forget their trousers than go in without their chains, and somehow you managed it. You've been so keen on rushing in here, it's a wonder we brought anything at all. George even advised us not to go. He wanted to do more research on the house, but no, you overruled him. Yes, which is what I do on account of being the leader. It's my responsibility to make bad decisions. That's right, I suppose it is. We stood there, arms folded, gloring at each other across the darkened landing in the haunted house. Then, like the sun coming out, Lockwood's glare softened to a grin. So, he said, how's your anger management going, Luce? I snorted. I admit I'm annoyed, but I'm not annoyed with you. It's different. I'm sure it is, but I do take your original point about the money. He clapped his gloved hands together briskly. All right, you win. George wouldn't approve, but I think we can risk it. I've driven her away for the moment, and that gives us some breathing space. If we're quick, we can settle this in half an hour. I stopped and lifted up the duffel bags. Just lead me to the place. The place proved to be on the far side of the study, a blank stretch of wall between two recessed stretches of chaotic bookshelf. In the harsh light of our torches, we saw it was still covered with ancient bedroom paper, drab and faded, and peeling near the coving. Puffy, shapeless roses ran floor to ceiling in slanting sides. In the middle of the space hung a coloured map showing the geology of the British Isles. The base of the wall was concealed by thigh-high piles of geology magazines, one or two of which were weighed down by dusty geological hammers. My keen investigative instinct told me that Mr. Hope might possibly have had a geology interest. I inspected the bookshelves on either side. I saw how the wall protruded at that point. Old chimney breast, I said. So she went in there. She was fading out before she reached the wall, but yes, I think so. Would make sense if the source was hidden in the chimney, wouldn't it? I nodded. Yes, it made sense. A natural cavity, big enough for anything at all. We began shifting the magazines away, carting them in cascading armfuls to make room. Space was an issue. Lockwood wanted to keep the original circle free and have a good access route to it from the wall where we were working. So we dumped most of the magazines by the door and even out on the landing. Every second armload or so, I stopped and listened carefully, but the house remained still. When we cleared a space big enough, I opened the bags and poured out another plastic pot of filings in a curving line across the floor. It formed a rough semicircle that extended out towards the crucial section of wall. I joined up the two ends of the straight line running along the base of the wall, keeping our yard or so back from it so that the iron couldn't be messed with by all the falling plaster. Once I'd finished, there was enough room inside the lines for us both to stand and have our duffel bags too. It would be pretty safe, but not secure, as if not as secure as if we'd had some chains. I also checked the original circle in the centre of the room. A few filings got scattered by our feet that we'd trampled past. I brushed them back into position. Lockwood removed the geological map and propped it against the desk. Then he went down to the kitchen and returned with a couple of lanterns. This time, watching in the dark was past. Action was required now. We needed proper light. He set the lanterns on the floor, inside our semicircle, and switched them on low, directing the beams towards the empty wall. The light illuminated it like a little stage. All this took about a quarter of an hour. At last we stood together inside the iron, pocket knives and crowbars ready. Looking at the wall. Want to hear my theory? Lockwood said. Thrill me. She was killed in the house decades ago, so long back that she grew quiet. Then Mr. Hope set up a study in the room, and it's triggered her somehow. It stands to reason that something of hers was concealed there, something she cares about, that makes her linger on. Clothes, maybe, or possessions, or a gift she promised another, or something else, I said. Yes. We stood and looked at the wall. End of chapter 3. Gonna take just a wee short break. Back in a minute or two. All right. Chapter 4. Ever since Marissa Fitz and Tom Rotwell conducted their celebrated investigations way back in the first years of the problem, finding the source of a haunting has been central to every agent's job. Yes, we do other stuff as well. We help create defences for worried households. We advise individuals on their personal protection. We can rig up salt traps in the garden, lay iron strips on thresholds, hang wards above cradles, and stock you with any number of lavender sticks, ghost lights, and other day-to-day items of security. But the essence of our role, the reason for our being, is always the same: to locate the specific place or object connected to a particular member of the restless dead. No one really knows how these sources function. Some claim the visitors actually are contained within them. Others say they mark points where the boundaries between the worlds have been worn thin by violence and extreme emotion. Agents don't have time to speculate either way. We're too busy trying to avoid being ghost touched to worry about philosophy. As Lockwood said, the source might be many things: the exact location of a crime, perhaps, or an object intimately connected to a sudden death, or maybe a prized possession of the visitor whenever they were alive. Most often, though, 73% according to the research conducted by the Rotwell Institute, it's associated with what the Fitz Manual calls personal organic remains. You can guess what that means. The point is, you never know until you look, which is what we were doing now. 5 minutes in, we'd almost stripped the central slab of the wall. The paper was decades old, the glue dry and turned to dust. We could slip our knives under it and cut away with great curls with ease. Some practically disintegrated in our hands, others flopped over our arms like giant folds of skin. The plaster of the wall beneath was pinkish and white and mottled, and speckled with large brown organic fragments of paste. It reminded me of a beheaded ham. Sorry, a breaded ham. Lockwood turned on one of the lanterns and made a closer inspection, running his hand along the uneven surface. He moved the lantern at different heights and angles, watching the play of shadows on the wall. "There was a cavity here at some point," he said. "A big one. Someone's filled it in. See how the plaster's a different colour, Luce?" "I see it. Can we break inside?" "Shouldn't be too difficult." He hefted his crowbar. "Everything quiet?" I glanced over my shoulder. Beyond the little circle of lantern light, the rest of the room was invisible. We were an illuminated island in a sea of blackness. I listened and heard nothing, but there was a steady, mounting pressure in the silence. I could feel it building in my ear. "We're okay for the moment," I said, "but it won't last long." "Better get on with it then." His bar swung, crunched into the plaster. A shower of pieces cascaded to the wall, or to the floor. 20 minutes later, the fronts of our clothes were spotted white, the toe caps of our boots smothered by the heaps and fragments ranged beneath the wall. The hole we'd made was half my height and as wide as a man. There was a rough, dark wood behind it, studded with old nails. "It's some kind of board," Lockwood said. Sweat gleamed on his forehead. He spoke with forced carelessness. "The front of the box, or cardboard, or something. Looks like it fills the whole wall space, Lucy." "Yeah," I said. "Mind the filings?" He stepped back too far, kicking them out of position. "That is what we had to focus on. Keep to the rules. Keep ourselves safe." If we had the chains, it wouldn't have been so difficult, but filings were treacherous, their line easily broken. I crouched down, got the brush and, with small, methodical movements, began to fix the break. Above me, Lockwood took a deep breath. Then came the soft crack of his crowbar biting into wood. With the line repaired, I scooped away several handfuls of plaster that threatened to spill over the barrier and the front. This done, I remained there, crouching, the fingertips of one hand pressed firmly on the floorboards. I stayed like that for a minute, maybe more. When I got to my feet, Lockwood had done some damage to the planks, but hadn't broken through. I tapped him on the arm. What? He struck the wall again. She's back, I said. The sound had been so faint that at first it had merged into the noise we made, and it was only by the vibrations in the floor that I'd noticed it at all. But even as I spoke, they began to rise in volume. 3 quick impacts. The last, a dreadful, soft, hard thud, then silence, before the sequence started over. It was an endless loop, identical each time, the sound memory of Mr. Hope falling down the stairs. I told Lockwood what I heard. He nodded brusquely. Okay, it doesn't change anything. Keep watch and don't let it unsettle you. That's what she's aiming for. She recognizes you're the weak one. I blinked. Sorry? What are you saying? Luce, this isn't time. I just mean emotionally. What? Like that's any better? He took a deep breath. All I'm saying is your kind of talent is much more sensitive than mine, but ironically, that very sensitivity leaves you more exposed to supernatural influences, which in cases like this might be a problem, okay? I stared at him. For a minute there, I thought you'd been listening to George. Lucy, I've not been listening to George. We turned away from each other, Lockwood to the wall, me to the room. I drew my rapier and waited. The study was dark and still. Thud, 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 went the echo in my ears. A cracking sound told me Lockwood had the crowbar wedged between the boards. There was a pushing sideways. He was pushing sideways with all his strength. Wood creaked, black nails shifted. Very slowly, one of our lanterns began to die. It flickered, faltered, became pale and small, as if someone were crushing out its life. Even as it did so, the other lanterns flared. The balance of the light in the room shifted. Our shadows swung oddly across the room. A gust of cold air blew through the study. I heard papers moving on the desk. You'd think she'd want us to do this, Lockwood panted. You'd think she'd want to be found. Out on the landing, a door banged. Doesn't seem so, I said. Other doors slammed. Elsewhere in the house, one after the other, 7 in a row. I heard the distant sound of breaking glass. Boring, Lockwood snarled. You've done that. Try something else. There was a sudden silence. How many times, I said, have I told you not to taunt them? It never ends well. Well, she was repeating herself. Get a seal ready. We're almost there. I bent down, rummaging in my bag. In the pockets, we carry a wide range of products designed to neutralize any given source. All were made with those key metals visitors can't abide, silver and iron. Shapes and decorations vary. There are boxes, tubes, nails and nets, pendants, bands and chains. Rotwell and Fitz have their specially stamped with their company logos, whereas Lockwood just uses one that's simple and unadorned. But the crucial thing is to select the right size for your visitor, the minimum grade necessary to block its passage through. I chose the chain net, delicate but potent, made of tightly fused links of silver. It was very carefully folded. When shaken loose, it could be draped over objects of considerable size, but for now I could grasp it in my palm. I stood up. I checked on the progress at the wall. Lockwood had succeeded in forcing out one of the boards, a little way. Behind it was a slender wedge of darkness. He heaved and strained, leaning back, grimacing with effort, his boots dug perilously close to the ridge of our iron filings. It's coming, he said. Good. I turned back to face the room, where the dead girl stood beside me, just beyond the iron line. So clear she was, she might have been alive and breathing, gazing upon a sunlit day. The cold, dim light shone full upon her face. I saw her as she must have been, once, long ago, before it happened. She was prettier than me, round-cheeked, small-nosed, and a full-lipped mouth, and large, imploring eyes. She looked like the kind of girl I'd always instinctively disliked, soft and silly, passive when it mattered, and, when it didn't, reliant on her charms to get her way. We stood there, head to head, her long hair blonde, my dark hair pale, with plaster and dust, her bare-legged in her little summer dress, me, red-nosed and shivering in my skirt, leggings, and padded parka. Without the iron line and what it represented, we might well have reached out and touched each other's faces. Who knows? Perhaps that's what she wanted. Perhaps that severance drove her rage. Her face was blank, without any emotion, but the force of her fury broke against me like a wave. I raised the folded chain net as some kind of ironic salute. In answer, bitter air whipped out of the darkness, scoring my face, slapping my hair against my cheeks. It struck hard against the iron barrier, making the filing shift. Could do with finishing this, I said. Lockwood gave a gasp of effort. There was a crack, and the wood grains tore. All across the study suddenly came a sudden rustling, magazines flipping over, books moving, dusty papers lifting off their piles and floating in flocks like rising birds. My coat was pressed against me, wind howling against the margins in the room. The ghost girl's hair and her dress were motionless. She stood staring through me like I was the one made of memory and air. Beside my boots, the filings began to drift and scatter. Hurry it up, I said. Got it. Give me the seal. I turned as quickly as I dared. The key thing now was not to cross the iron line. I offered him the folded net. Just as I did so, Lockwood gave a final heave upon his crowbar, and the board gave way. It cracked across its width, near the bottom of our hole, and ruptured forward, carrying with it two others that were nailed to it by connecting spurs of wood. The crowbar slipped from its recess and suddenly came free. Lockwood lost his balance. He slipped sideways and would have tumbled right out of the circle had I not lunged across to steady him. We clung together for a moment, teetering above the filings. Thanks, Luce, Lockwood said. That was almost bad. He grinned. I nodded with relief. At which point the broken boards fell out towards us, revealing the contents of the wall. We'd known. Of course we'd known. But it was still a shock. And shocks make you both jerk backwards and are never at best when you're already off balance, when the two of you are already on the brink. So it was that I didn't get much of a look inside the cavity before we toppled over together, arms locked, legs tangled, Lockwood above and me below, beyond the protection of the iron. But I'd seen enough to have the image seared upon my mind. She still had her blonde hair. That was the same, although so smirched with soot and dust, so choked up with cobwebs, it was impossible to tell where it finished or began. The rest was harder to recognize. A thing of bones, bared teeth, shrunken skin, dark and twisted and burnt wood, and still propped snugly in a bed of bricks where it had rested for maybe 50 years. The scraps of the pretty summer dress hung loose on the jutting bones. Orange-yellow sunflowers glinted dimly within a shroud of webs. I hit the floor. The back of my head struck the wood, and dark was seared by light. Then Lockwood's weight drove down on me. My breath burst from my mouth. The brightness faded. My mind cleared. My eyes opened. I was lying on my back, and the silver chain net still clutched tightly in one hand. That was good news. I'd also dropped my rapier again. Lockwood had already rolled off me and away. I rolled too, knelt into a crouch, and frantically looked for my blade. What did I see instead? A mess of iron filings scattered by our fall. Lockwood kneeling, head down, hair flopped forward, struggling to pull his sword clear of the long, heavy greatcoat, and the ghost girl, floating silently above him. Lockwood! His head jerked up. His coat had gotten twisted beneath his knees and was preventing him access from his belt. He couldn't free his sword in time. The girl dropped low, trailing wreaths of other light. Long, pale hands stretched out towards his face. I tore a canister from my belt and hurled it without a thought. It passed straight through the stooping shape and struck the wall behind. The glass tab broke. Sheets of magnesium fire licked out and sliced across the girl, who vanished in billowing plumes of mist. Lockwood threw himself sideways, iron sparks flickering in his hair. Greek fire's good stuff, no question. The mix of iron, magnesium, and salt hits your visitor three ways at once. Red hot iron and salt cut through the substance, while the searing light and ignited magnesium causes it intolerable pain. But, and here's the snag, even though it burns out fast, it has a tendency to set other things on fire as well, which is why the Fitz manual advises against using it indoors, except in controlled situations. The present conditions involved a study filled with papers and a very vengeful spectre. Would you call that even the slightest bit controlled? Not really. Something, somewhere, wailed in pain and fury. The wind in the study, which had perhaps died back a little, suddenly redoubled. Burning papers, ignited by the fast surge from the canister, were plucked aloft, blown directly at my face. I batted them away, watched them whirl off, willed by something unseen. They blew in squalls across the room, landed on books and shelves, on desks and curtains, on curls of wallpaper, on bone-dry files and letters, on dusty cushions, on the chair. Like stars at dusk, hundreds of little fires winked into being, one after the other, high, low, and all around. Lockwood had risen to his feet, hair and coat both smoking. He flicked his coat aside. A flash of silver. The rapier was in his hand. His eyes were fixed past me on the shadowed corner of the room. Here, in the midst of whirling papers, a shape was starting to reform. Lucy, his voice was hard to make out against the howling wind. Plan E. We follow Plan E. Plan E? What the devil was Plan E? Lockwood had so many. It was hard to think straight with every other stack of magazines going up in flames, and those flames leaping higher. On the way back to the landing suddenly blocked by smoke and flaring light. Lockwood, I cried, the door. No time. I'll call her off. You do the source, or I'll draw her off. Oh yes, that Plan E. Luring the visitor away from where the crucial action was, and already Lockwood was dancing through the smoke, moving with insolvent confidence toward the waiting shape. Burning fragments blew about his head. He ignored them, kept his rapier lowered by his side. He seemed unprotected. The girl made a sudden rush. Lockwood leapt back, rapier swinging up at the last minute to parry an outstretched spectral hand. Her long blonde hair, blending with the smoke, curled around him from either side. He ducked and feinted, slicing the misty tendrils into nothing. His sword was a blur of movement. Safe behind his flashing steel, he steadily retreated, leading the ghost ever further from the chimney breast and broken wall. In other words, giving me a chance. I plunged forward, fighting against the raging wind. Air slammed into me, screaming with a human voice. Sparks spat against my face. The breath was driven from my lungs. Flames rose up on every side, reaching out as I passed by. The wrath of the air redoubled. I was slow to almost a standstill, but ploughed my way onwards, step by step. Beside the chimney, the bookshelves had erupted into walls of flame. Trails of racing fire ran like mercury along the floor. Ahead of me, the plaster surface swam with orange light. The hole itself was a pool of darkness, the object inside scarcely visible. Behind a veil of webs, I glimpsed its lipless smile. It's never good to see such things directly. They distract you from your job. I shook the chain net loose, held it trailing in my hand. Nearer, nearer. step by step. Now I was close. Now I could have looked at her if I'd chosen, but I kept my eyes averted from her face. I saw little spiders clustering around on the cobwebs like they always do. I saw the bony neck, the flowery cotton dress, gaping. I also saw a sudden glint of gold, something hanging beneath the coat or the throat. A little golden chain. I reached the hole, stood with the net ready, amid the roar of wind and fire, and, just for a moment, I hesitated at the delicate golden necklace that hung there in the dark and ended in a pendant of some kind. I could just see it sparkling, the horrid gap in the dress, the bony chest. Once that girl's living hands had fixed it around her neck, thinking she'd make herself look lovelier for the day. And still it hung there, decades later, and still it shone. The flesh beneath was blackened and sunken and dead. A rush of pity filled my heart. Who did this to you? I said. Lucy! Lockwood's cry was above the howling wind. I turned my head. I saw the ghost girl rushing at me through the rising flames. Her face was blank, her eyes bore into mine, her arms outstretched as if in greeting or embrace. It wasn't the type of embrace I fancied. Blindly, I thrust both hands through the mess of cobwebs, sending the spiders racing. I sought to lower the net, but it had caught on a snag of wood in the mouth of the hole. The girl was almost upon me. I gave a frantic heave. The splinter broke. With a sob, I draped the chain net over the dry, soft, dusty hair. Iron and silver enfolded, dropped down across the head and torso, encasing them securely as a cage. At once the girl's momentum stalled. She was frozen in midair. A sigh, a moan, a shudder. Her hair fell forward and hid her face. Her other light grew dim, dim, dimmer, gone. She'd winked out of existence, as if she'd never been, and with her the force that filled the house went too. There was a sudden release of pressure. My ears popped. Wind died. The room was full of burning scraps of paper, drifting slowly to the floor. Just like that. That's what happens when you successfully neutralize a source. I took a deep breath and listened. Yes, the house was quiet. The girl had gone. Of course, when I say quiet, I don't mean on a I only mean on a psychic level. Fires raged throughout the study. The floor was alight. Smoke hid the ceiling. The piles of papers we had dumped on the floor roared white, and the whole landing was aflame. There was no way out that direction. On the other side of the room, Lockwood waved urgently, pointing to the window. I nodded. No time to waste. The house was going up. But first, almost without thinking, I turned back to the hole, reached under the net, and, closing my mind to what else I touched there, grasped the little gold necklace. That one uncorrupted reminder of what a living girl had been. When I pulled, the chain came freely, as it had been unclasped, as if it had been unclasped. I stuffed it all, chain, pendant, webs, and dust, into my pocket. Then, turning, I zigzagged between the fires to the desk below the window. Lockwood had already vaulted onto it, putting a stack of burning papers to the floor. He tried the window. No go. Stiff or locked, didn't matter which. He kicked it open, splintering the latch. I jumped up beside him. For the first time in hours, we breathed fresh, wet, foggy air. We knelt there on the windowsill, side by side. Around us, curtains hissed, went up in flames. Out in the garden, our silhouettes crouched in a square of swirling light. You all right? Lockwood said. Something happened by that hole? No, nothing, I'm fine. I smiled wanly at him. Well, another case solved. Yes, won't Miss Hope be pleased? True, her house will have burned down, but at least it's ghost-free. He looked at me. So, so, I peered over the sill, hunting vainly for the ground. It was too dark and too distant to be seen. It'll be fine, Lockwood said. I'm almost sure there was some whopping bushes down there. Good. That and a concrete patio. He patted my arm. Come on, Lucy. Turn and drop. It's not like we have a choice. Well, he was right about that bit. When I glanced back into the room, the flames had spread across the floor. They'd almost reached the chimney breast. The hole and its contents were being greedily consumed by tongues of fire. I gave a sigh. Okay, if you say so. Lockwood grinned a sooty grin. In 6 months, have I ever let you down? I was just opening my mouth to start the list when the ceiling above the desk gave way. Burning spears of wood and chunks of plaster crashed down behind us. Something struck me in the back and knocked me out of over the windowsill. Lockwood tried to grab me as I fell, but he lost his balance. Our hands snapped shut on air. We seemed to hang there for a moment, suspended together between heat and cold, life and death. Then we both toppled forward into the night, and there was nothing but rushing darkness all around. And that's the end of chapter 4. Thank you for joining me. I'll have this up on YouTube, and thanks for listening.